Hey everyone. As you come in, I would just encourage everyone to put in maybe like your name and school district if relevant, or just where you're based from. And then if applicable, like an interesting thing you're working on in your district or in your job. Go lead by example. Yeah, we're doing intros. We said name, position, and location. All right, hello everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about NSBMA. So the focus of the session is to just present on, student experiences and some of the research we've gathered at NSBMA. We're still a relatively new organization, so we're really excited to begin some partnerships, and we really want to keep contact with y'all after this is over. So yeah. And I'll pass it over to Connor to introduce himself, and we'll get started. And I forgot to say, I'm Nia Batra. I'm a student board member in the City Schools of Decatur in Georgia. A lot of fun in Georgia, lots to talk about there. So that's me. And then I also serve as NSBMA's Southeast Vice President.
Hi, my name's Connor Moikins. I serve as a student board member on my local school board in Orono, Maine, which is a small district in central Maine, hometown of the University of Maine, if you know that. And I'm also serving as the executive president of the National Student Board Member Association. A little bit about the National Student Board Member Association. Our mission is that we connect, support, and empower student school board members and other educational stakeholders to advance student representation in educational decision making, providing the skills, tools, and knowledge to drive meaningful change in their schools and communities. Our stated vision is that we envision an education system where students, as primary stakeholders, play a central role in all aspects of governance and decision making, working in partnership with adults as equals to improve education. And then a little bit of an overview. Student board members are one of the very few formal roles for students to shape education, governance, and policy. Student board members or NSBMA has done work examining where the role exists, what power students hold, and what support they receive to help us understand whether participation is meaningful in practice. And when designed well, student board members can strengthen educational governance and youth civic engagement. And furthermore, NSBMA is very unique in that it is student-led and intergenerational. It's done for students and by students. So if you'll remember, Nia and I both serve on positions on the executive council. So we work a lot to provide resources and opportunities for other students on boards.
All right. Thank you so much, Connor and Nia. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is George Chironis. I am the executive director at the National Student Board Member Association, working with Connor, Nia, and a host of other great student board members from across the country. We're really excited for today's conversation. So, I'm going to go ahead and provide an overview of some of the research and insights we've been able to gather over the last year, and then we'll segue directly into a panel where you will have the chance to hear directly from our student board members here today and from their experiences from different parts of the country that they're serving in. Um, so, as I mentioned, we've had the opportunity to conduct a year of research and engagement last year in New England. We did a policy mapping that was focused on the states of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Largely based on publicly available data. We also held a series of stakeholder conversations with both adult and student board members, but also other youth and community serving groups, as well as adult serving organizations such as state school board associations, superintendent associations, and so on. We also were able to organize to lead a national survey of student board members, which received 101 responses across the country. And all of this work was supported by a grant from the Barr Foundation, and our mapping efforts, particularly around the student board member position and where that exists in New England, followed a methodology employed by Columbia University's School Boards and Youth Engagement Lab. So, what we see in terms of, and it's great to see there's quite a few researchers on the call today, so we'd love to kind of hear from your insights as well, but it's really an uneven landscape when it comes to student board member positions across the country. So the majority of states, I believe over 40 states, actually have student board members, but only 12 states have actually enacted legislation specifically relating to student board members. Now, when it comes to New England specifically, what we found over the last year is that student representation, perhaps unsurprisingly, does tend to be more common when it's mandated by state policy. So there's a few states where it's mandated, and we'll get to that in a second. But in Massachusetts, where it's required, 95% of districts had an active student board member. Maine also, Maine, Rhode Island, and Vermont, which are three states where the position is not explicitly mandated, had slightly lower participation or slightly lower level of student board member programs across districts. I will say again, I will reiterate that this is based on publicly available information, so based on district website information and where it's clear and publicly stated that there is a student board member. Hopping back a little bit to give you a sense of what the national landscape looks like. So when it comes to state laws, this map here shows you an example, or it shows you rather across the country where there are student board member policy laws in effect in a state. So in a handful of states, they are actually mandated. So that's Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Maryland, where it's by state law mandated that districts have to have students represented on their boards of education. There are a handful of other states where it's optional, but there is also explicit reference to student representatives or student board members. And there are also states where over the last couple of years, there have been bills. Some have not been as successful, others are still being discussed, but we just wanted to give you a full picture of what it looks like across the country and where some of these statewide bills are being discussed. Sometimes these are led by students, sometimes they're led by politicians or other actors as well. Now, when it comes to what it looks like in practice, actually, the position is pretty widespread, even in states, as I mentioned previously, where there's not specific policy or law pertaining to student board members. So the map you see now gives you a sense of states where the student board member position is widespread versus where it's a recurring practice. So maybe one or two or actually a handful of districts have the position, as well as states where, according to our information, there are no student board members at the moment. Although I often say when I present this map, it's an ever-evolving picture. There's conversations constantly happening, and we see a general trend in the direction of increasing student representation. We estimate that today there are over 1,500 student board members serving across the United States. So, delving a little bit more into some of the research we conducted, one key thing to take away is that the presence of student board members doesn't necessarily equal that students have influence and feel like they have power in school boards. So the national survey that we conducted of student board members, in that survey, 70% of student board members described their role as symbolic, excluded, or not taken seriously. 30% said that they felt like they had a real role in decision making, and all of the respondents to the survey indicated that the one thing that they would change if they could was being taken more seriously in their role. We also heard about barriers to meaningful student participation, and we heard both from adults and student board members that school board jargon can be a barrier to meaningful participation, to understanding kind of when you come into the school board and being able to navigate that with kind of with ease and fluency. We heard specifically from students that school boards tend to be an adult-centered culture, which is not intentionally designed for student engagement, and that there are power imbalances which mean that students have a lack of ability to meaningfully influence decisions. The overwhelming majority of student board members at the local district or county level are non-voting. 41% of our survey respondents mentioned that they would like full voting rights as a means to be taken seriously, but the picture is a little bit more nuanced. So in Massachusetts, where we did a little more kind of had more work focused in the New England space, and in Massachusetts, we did hear concerns from some students about having voting rights unless they are accompanied by clear protections, particularly related to charged and controversial issues. And this is especially relevant in an increasingly polarized climate and increasingly polarized school board climate. In the context of potentially being targeted, we did in our research also hear from some students based on their identity that they felt targeted after or outside the board meeting space. We do also see preferential or advisory voting rights as a way, as an in-between between non-voting rights and full voting rights. And advisory voting rights are where students are actually asked on their opinion and how they would vote on pretty much every policy that comes to the board, but the outcome doesn't then, the vote doesn't influence the outcome. So this was present across New England states where we did more focused research, but Maine was really the highest percentage, had the highest percentage of districts that offered preferential voting rights. And we found that 17%, excuse me, of districts that have student board members, or that of total districts, my apologies, 17% of all districts in Maine gave student board members preferential voting rights. And just to give you a sense of what some of the students were saying, I'm not going to read every single one of these quotes, but I wanted to share them and put them up on the screen so you can get a sense of what, put some color onto some of the research findings and some of what I've been talking about in terms of students' experiences. So students saying that they feel like they have a voice, but only to a certain extent, and that can be really challenging to deal with sometimes. So one thing that's very important that we found is extremely important, and we kind of knew this already, since this is the reason we were established as NSBMA. But the top support that students most often identify needing was around onboarding and training, peer-to-peer coaching and support, and networking opportunities. A lot of student board members identified that they had a very large learning curve when they entered the position. And we also found that specifically in relation to New England students that were serving on state boards of education, indicated that they had more resources available for their own training and support and onboarding compared to our conversations with students serving on local school boards. We did also hear a lot from adult school board members, and many of them indicated wanting more support in getting consistent engagement from student board members. And once again, I just wanted to kind of highlight two student quotes from our survey. So like on challenges faced, one student said how understanding how to transform ideas and initiatives into actionable policies was really a challenge stepping into that school board space. I wanted to end the kind of research piece on a positive note, and again, this is a series of quotes in students' words themselves. So what we do see is really powerful with the student board member position is that it truly fuels youth civic engagement. There's a positive impact on students who serve in the student board member position, then have a positive, their positive perception towards civic engagement and understand why it's important. And I think, as they graduate, their term ends, and they move out of the role, they will then take these attitudes and go on. And as they move into their student or work or professional lives or whatever comes next, they will be people who want to make sure that others they work with have agency and are able to have that engagement. So That's a summary of our research. We will be sharing a brief on our website in the coming weeks, and we'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar and the slides. But with that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to our student panelists to hear directly from a handful of students from across the country. So, Nia, over to you.
Thanks, George. Yeah, so while we have some numbers and some quotes on the screen, I really wanted y'all to have the opportunity to hear directly from students themselves. So we have a really diverse panel for y'all today. We'd love if you guys could use that Q&A box to ask some questions, and we'll try and incorporate them into our discussion. But really, we just want to have a very open, sprawling discussion about some of our own experiences. So I guess first of all, I wanted to go down the line, um, and we can just introduce ourselves with our name, grade, the number of students we represent in our district, and what our district is, obviously. So, I'll begin. I'm Nia Batra. I serve 5,500 students in the schools of Decatur in Decatur, Georgia, which is in Southeast Atlanta. I'll pass it to Connor.
All right. So I've said that my name is Connor Moykins. I'm a senior. I am in the district RSU 26, also known as Orno, as I mentioned. I represent roughly 800 students on my school board, 300 of which are from the high school. And I'll pass it on to Omari.
I think that was me. My apologies, everyone. My Wi-Fi is a little messy, but greetings, everyone. My name is Omari Barnes. I am a high school student in Maryland. I am a state student board member who proudly represents the 850 thousand students in the state of Maryland. And I will pass it on to Faith.
Hi, everyone. My name is Faith McConan. I serve as the Fairfax County Public Schools student representative. I represent, that's in Virginia. We are the ninth largest district, and I represent 180,000 students. And I'll pass that on to Allison. Or are we done?
Yeah, that should be all. So I think the next question is, and we really just want to like center this on, I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. But we as student board members are championing a lot of initiatives in our own districts based on what we've heard from the students around us. So what's like one thing you're really proud of that you've accomplished in your district or something that you're really glad you worked on?
I can go first. One thing that I have been really trying to work on in my district is decreasing the separation between student understanding and the board. Uh, Despite it being a very small district, a lot of the students aren't super engaged with the workings of the school. So acting as kind of a liaison between the community and my school board, letting them know, hey, next Tuesday there's a controversial vote that may ban cell phones for the entire school year. Or, hey, next Tuesday they're voting on cutting a music teacher's position that you really like, letting them know about all this. And I've had students say things like, I didn't even know we had a school board, or I didn't know we had student representatives, things like that, working to decrease that gap.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I take a real joy in being one of the state student board member seats that has voting authority. And as part of that voting authority, I also have the authority to make motions. And so at an education policy meeting a few months ago, I was able to push through successfully an amendment to our library media program regulations to establish student seats on the committees that review objections to library materials. And it doesn't prescribe how that student should vote, but it just ensures that student input is at the table when decisions are made about what they are reading and what is in their curriculum. So that's something I am incredibly proud of, helping to create more student autonomy and input into what is in school libraries.
One thing that I'm proud of in my district is actively involving students in the decisions that the board is making. With such a big district, I think a lot of the time students can kind of get disconnected from what the board is doing, even when they're in leadership roles. For example, we have a student superintendent advisory council that is sometimes disconnected from what the board is doing, and I present to them. And one of the presentations that really stuck with me was when I was talking about the student protest rule. And that is something that while the ICE protests were happening, a lot of students were really enraged that the board was not letting school protests happen during school hours. And we are currently working with the board to get that fixed. But seeing how like students were very, once they were informed how receptive how eager they were, excuse me, to present their opinion, to go to board meetings and tell their board members that this is something I really care about and want to do, that is one thing I was really proud of.
Yeah, I feel like I've done a couple of things I'm really proud of. So I guess the more tangible things would be this year, in Georgia, I'm the only like full-term student representative. So I was able to work with a representative to um, co-author and introduce legislation that would encourage local boards to add student members in Georgia. Unfortunately, it did not pass through. If anyone is familiar with the Georgia legislature, you know how hard it is to get anything that happened down there. But that was a really cool experience to like bring students to the Capitol and have them talk to their representatives about representation. I also, Faith brought up like responding to political moments and student protests and, and responding to some student walkouts around ICE and, increased presence in of federal authorities in our schools. I worked with legal to draft a resolution in my own district to like reaffirm our commitment to educating all students regardless of immigration status and yeah, like making actual procedures in that case. And so we just passed it at yesterday's board meeting, which I'm really proud of. And now we're working on a real policy for next month. And then I also believe that like the contributions um, of student board members kind of like take on many forms, like even just in discussion, like really grounding conversations and like students instead of like board members are constantly hearing the opinions of the public but who are truly serving as students, so I've been able to ground the adults in the conversation into like focusing on students and really bringing attention back to them, even if there are external pressures.
All right, moving on to our next question. It is, why do you think student voice is important? I can start off here. I think that student voice is extremely important, as they're the primary stakeholder in their education. They are the people that are on the receiving end of this every single day, Monday to Friday. And the adult board members obviously do their best to understand the students and do what's best for them, but it's impossible for there to be a perfect system where they understand everything. And a little story that I think demonstrates how important it is for the board members to be connected with the students is my board had a really controversial vote last year on putting pickleball lines on the tennis courts. People always laugh when I say that, but this went on for months and was very controversial. And in the end, it ended up passing 4-1. And the only board member who voted against it was the one who had actually talked to the students on the tennis team as they were all in opposition, despite myself and the other student representative voicing that students were against it.
Yeah, I would say it is important because uh, throughout American history and world history, it has always been young people that have been at the forefront of creating change. You look at any social movement, and it is the young people who decided to stand up and to chart a new way and to be bold and introduce a new way of thought. And student voice at this present moment in education, it just goes to show we don't have to wait. We can be the change makers right now. And the importance of that sentiment is something that you really cannot understate, because what's going on now in education will determine what our economy looks like, what our future looks like. And so right now, this is a battleground that we have to be present. We have to be present soldiers in this fight for public education. And that's why I believe that student voice is just so important to have at the table.
Following with what, oh, sorry. Following with what Connor and Omari were saying, I really think when people ask, I remember I was asked this, like, how do you think your district shows student voice? Do you think student voice is important? How do you think it's shown? It was like a little interview thing, and I responded to it. And it took me a second because I was like, how do I say it, like, in a not like such a common sense way? Because it's like explaining student voice, like, why is student voice not important? Why is that not your first thing? So, like, when I see districts and other, like, positions like not prioritizing student voice, I'm like, we're the ones at the receiving end of this. Like, this is for us. It should be by us for us. And that just like it brings me back to that whole common sense thing. But student voice, we need to have a voice in what's going on for our decisions.
Yeah, just adding on to that, like whenever I get asked this question and they like to showboat me as like the only rep in Georgia, so I've had to answer this question a lot. And the first thing I always do is I like have everyone in the room. I'm like, raise your hand if you went to public school in the last 15 years, and virtually no one raises their hand. And like Faith said, it's just like obvious that the people that are being so directly impacted by these decisions should be represented in the decision making. Like there have been so many innovations in education since these people have gone to school. There's, cell phones, AI now, things that are like rapidly changing faster than adults or even students can comprehend. Even yesterday at my board meeting, we saw a presentation about, students asking for Narcan in schools because we are seeing like increased drug use in schools. And those are a lot of issues that we need to deal with firsthand because students have innovative ideas. And when they're actually given the tools, like we are, like as student representatives, to actually learn, how budget and policy works, we're not just asking for things like, oh, we want better lunch. We're asking for things like, put Narcan in places that are accessible, create a resolution to, protect students and that kind of thing. So I think it's extremely important. Moving on to the next question, and I also wanted to partially respond to this person's longer question in the Q&A, but obviously this role takes a lot of forms in from district to district. Omari is a state representative. We're all local districts. So if you could just take a moment to talk through some of the intricacies of your school as far as like compensation, if you get compensation, voting rights, how you're elected and selected, and what kind of onboarding you received, and any other kind of format like of your role. Are there two representatives? Things like that. So I can go ahead and start. The way that my district does it is as a sophomore, you run and are elected by your peers. And then as a junior, you are an apprentice. So you don't sit on the board, but you go to all the conferences, you go to all the retreats and trainings and things. But it does give you time to actually like absorb and learn and ask your questions. And then as a senior, I'm in my senior year, you actually get to sit on the dais with a microphone. I don't have voting rights and I really wish I could be compensated, but I know in a lot of states that's just frankly illegal. So, I'm working to establish some kind of scholarship or something um, for my successors. But yeah, it's pretty much how it works in my district.
In In my district, it's a little bit different. Uh, I really like how you guys start off as sophomores. We always have you start off, you run, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors are eligible to run, seniors can't run. And you're elected by the superintendent's advisory committee, which is four students that are picked from each high school. And there's two rounds of elections, virtual, in person. They narrow down from like 60 people to 15 to three, then to one. And after that, you have 2 months and then you do onboarding training. And that onboarding training is not more than a week, it's 2 days. We don't have voting rights, one thing that I really do want. And the election, I already talked about the election process. The compensation is minimum wage per hour. They changed it this year. It used to be $50 per public meeting. And you can, for us, you're allowed to leave the meetings, the actual official board meetings, whenever you want because we do run pretty late, almost to midnight.
Do you feel like being compensated like enables you to do your role better?
I think it does partially because I'm not worried about having to get an after school job to save for college or anything like that. It does help me. It would help me more if I logged in my hours on time. That is something I do struggle with because I keep forgetting we get compensated for the role.
I can go next. So in my district, the student board member role is not compensated. This is similar to the adults, though my district is unique in that, or not necessarily unique, but the adults also are not compensated. So at least there's not a gap between students and adults, but there are a lot of considerations that need to go into whether or not a role is compensated. Things that I like to bring up are just that compensation can look very different than just a stipend. As Nia mentioned, sometimes districts provide scholarships, especially things like reimbursing mileage or gas are things that districts do that I think can be great, especially being from a rural district where students commute really far to come to school, up to over an hour. I do not have any voting rights, but I am actively working with my district to establish honorary voting rights or preferential voting rights. So hopefully by the end of my senior year, they will be established for future board members. There's actually no election process for me. I'm appointed, which happens at the end of sophomore year. You start serving your junior year and then also your senior year. And it's a handy kind of legacy system where you're on a 2-year roll and there's always a junior and a senior. And that way there's always an older board member to mentor the younger one.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm a big advocate for 2-year terms. In Maryland, one of the things I really appreciate about the state is that the student board seat is really approached in the same manner as any of the adult board seats. So all of the school board seats for the state of Maryland on the state level are appointed by the governor, including this seat. My position is actually written into state law that the governor shall appoint one student to the state board. So that helps a lot. And state law also establishes my voting rights. So I do have voting rights, which are basically virtually I can vote on everything that comes before the board. And that is such a massive privilege. And I recognize the uniqueness of it. There are two exceptions. I cannot vote on certain legal appeals that come before the board. And then I believe negative personnel actions. But all of the policies, regulations that come through the board, I can vote on, and that's been a huge help, as I mentioned, with the regulation that I amended. That's sort of how the process works. You attend a conference of all of the SGAs in the state. There's an election. So you're nominated top two. The top two names are sent to the governor, and the governor appoints one. And so it's an election and appointment at the same time.
Amazing, Amari. I bet it must have been nerve-wracking to get that decision. I before we go to the next question, I just wanted to, I think the a question an audience member asks is relevant, which is like, naturally with some of these selection processes and how the role works can kind of lead to specific like pipelines or biases and like the kind of person who ends up doing it. So maybe like one person can speak to maybe the typical kind of person you might see run for this thing, for this kind of district, or like what barriers kind of shape that.
I think I'd like to take that one. If I can make my answer short if anyone wants to go after me. But for me, since our district, anybody freshman through junior can run for the role, it really just attracts a lot of kids who want to run for like who just want to see what student government is about. And like a lot of people, some people might not have a full understanding of the position, but through the election process, I think it does a really good job of very filtering like how prepared you can be for the role. And I'm just turning off my light. Sorry, it's really annoying me. How prepared you are for the role, how like well equipped you are. And I remember they asked, I think, more than 30 questions over the series of like a whole day with like one-to-one interviews. And one of them kind of was like, how would you present this at a board meeting? What is one of the main ideas you'd like? And sometimes students hadn't been to a board meeting, some of the candidates hadn't been. So that kind of was like a factor that kind of pushed students out of the role. But the students who had been to the board meetings and had experience with were kind of pushed up. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for me, Maryland is an incredibly diverse state. They call us America in miniature. And in many of the extremities of the state, including Western Maryland and the Eastern Shore of Maryland, right next to the Chesapeake Bay, it is difficult for students from those more rural communities to really get involved because of the way that the process works, where you have all of the SGAs coming together. Some counties may have smaller delegations at that conference than others. And so it's been a constant struggle to get some of the more rural communities amplify their voice. In fact, I was visiting with them earlier today to try to continue to encourage that interest and cultivate that engagement with them. So that's something that's been something we're working on in the state.
Yeah, my district, since it's appointed, uh, I forgot to mention there's an application that goes out as well, and from there you're interviewed by the board chair and the superintendent. And I think appointing definitely has significant flaws in that adults tend to favor certain demographics of students, those who may be more involved extracurricularly, more already civically aware, those students who tend to take more advanced classes or plan on going to college, and that can result in skewed perspective over time. So it's really important to think about how different selection processes can affect who gets chosen. A point that I frequently like to make about elections is that adults many times to me have said that a lot of times when there's an election for student council or school board student representative, then it frequently turns into a popularity contest among students. And I just like to say that that's what any election is, just a popularity contest getting people to like you. And yeah. Um, I see a question in the chat additionally. Just to quickly point out, it would be great if we have a specific Q&A feature. So it would be great if people could use that. That way we can also utilize responding to it through chat. But it's asking if we get credit in our schools. And mine, I'll just speak for myself. My school does not give any form of credit. We just get volunteer hours. But moving on to the next question, do the adult board members in your district actually value your input? And I think that this is a fairly complex question. Going off the story I shared earlier, all the board members voted to put pickleball lines on the tennis courts, despite the student representatives being opposed, except for the one who actually talked to the students themselves. And so it kind of makes you think what the role of the student board member was there if the only board member who thought about the student voice actually went to the actual students. Overall, I definitely feel that my voice is valued, and a lot of my board members are really amazing in that they'll specifically reach out to the students to ask for their voice in consideration on topics that involve them. But the extent that it's actually considered in the final decision is to be determined.
I agree with Connor on the part that it doesn't really result in the final decision. I have amazing board members. I love them all. And we actually had a new one recently appointed, and he was one of those people who are emailing like, "Thank you so much for this. What do you think about this?" And I really appreciate that from the board members. But when it comes down to certain decisions, I'm allowed to participate in the discussions. I can't make amendments and I cannot make motions. Whenever I like flip my light on, I can become a part of the discussion. Like I don't have any barriers on that. And I also speak during my student rep matters where I have 5 to 10 minutes or more if I want. I don't think always that what the perspectives that I share are being reflected in decisions they make. And I think that's what the true value is. If like what we say is just noise and we're speaking into the void and nothing's being said, even if all students want this, well, not every student's going to agree on everything. But if the majority of students are saying they want something and then the board puts their own like financial priorities or other things above that, I don't think that's truly valuing.
Yeah, definitely. I would totally agree with you, Faith. For me, Maryland is a pretty radical state in terms of its support for student board members. My board is incredibly supportive. And I'm involved in every single decision that is made. Probably helps that the president of my board, the Maryland State Board of Education, Dr. Joshua Michael, was actually in my seat 20 years ago. And so I kind of have the big dog on my side whenever I weigh into a conversation. And he also gives me opportunities to, like just at the last board meeting, I gave a statement on behalf of the board on library media specialist. Every 2 weeks or so, the vice president of the board reaches out, as she does with every other board member, to ask me what are my thoughts on the agenda items. Do I want to pull anything from the consent agenda for further consideration? And we go from there. And also, I have voting rights. And so it makes it a little bit difficult to ignore me when I can actually hold up an agenda item from being processed. And so that helps a lot. I'm not going to understate that at all. But the Maryland is incredible in terms of the way it supports a student board member. And the role has been around since 1985.
Yeah, Maryland has definitely been a leader. Yeah, our board member actually modeled our position off of Maryland's initiative. So yeah, I just have to like firstly echo like what Faith said. Like, board members can do everything to like solicit voice, but if it's actually not being um like implemented, it's pretty much meaningless. So instead of like making forums, like you have to give your student rep opportunities to like do the work and then also like listen to them and incorporate them into your decisions. And I do really feel like that has existed on my board. I don't just like lead my own initiatives and student initiatives, but I really believe every decision impacts students. So, I am paying attention to every line item in the budget and I am asking those questions. So even as we're building like a pretty contentious like early learning center, I'm the one that's saying like, hey all, even though the community thinks this, the students need this. And so then they kind of all go like, yeah, that's right. And we do need to focus on students. So I definitely think my board has enabled me to do that, but I also think there are some mechanisms in which I'm left out. Like Amari said, he gets involved in the agenda discussions. I do receive board prep directly with my superintendent, but I don't have input on like I don't get constituent emails, so I'm often out of loop on some of the hot topics in the neighborhood and things like that. So, I do think we should keep working on refining the role and expanding, um, what rights students have because I really think they can just be equal to adults. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be. Um, but yeah, and I do think we'll talk about that a little bit more. So then moving on to the next question, what issues do you think are important to you as a student representative, and do you think are important to the students you represent?
I think like a handbook of student rights is really important to students, and I'm kind of going on the physical here because I think there's been a lot of incidents in my county over the past few years that have happened where it's like your stated rights were not put into place by your school, and it turns into this whole thing of, well, the division leadership said this said this said this, and it's you don't know who to talk to. And I think clarifying the student rights and responsibilities document we have in FCPS is one of the most important things I can help and contribute to in my current role. And I've had students come to me and we've kind of like looked at the SRNR and said, well, this was supposed to happen. The chain of command was supposed to happen here and it didn't happen. So I think getting students involved in that decision of what do you think your rights should look like in this district? What do you think this county, like FCPS, what do you think they can do better to protect your rights as a student? I think those discussions are important.
Yeah, I can go next. So, an issue that I find really interesting to engage with as a student is technology debates, whether it be phone bans, AI, or whether or not technology has any place in a school district. My district actually just decided to next year completely reconsider how we are going to engage with technology as adults and the student body, which could include discussion of eliminating all technology. Um, and topics like this, I think, are really important to discuss with students in mind because there are two conflicting sources. Students frequently say that technology has negatively impacted their mental health, but then also a lot of students are really concerned about the future of AI in the workforce. And a lot of times having a better grip on AI can really bolster students' abilities to get jobs and be successful later in life when getting hired. So there's a lot of things to consider that to make a decision in the student's best interest on AI and technology.
Yeah, I'm echoing that. I think there are a lot of really common ones that you'll hear from a lot of students, like AI, like cell phones. And I also just have to say, not a homogenous group. I'm in the camp, and I know there are a lot of other students in the camp of like, get the phones out of the schools, get AI out of the schools. There are a lot of students that like really love those things. But I also think part of it is like, you know, students rely on AI because they feel like they can't complete their work on their own, and that's like a whole other issue. But I also think students care about the same things adults care about. They care about, how things are being funded. They care about like the quality of their schools. And one thing that doesn't often come up, but I feel like I hear, from my meetings with kindergarteners to my meetings with seniors in high school, is teachers. Because I think adults really undervalue how students, besides each other, the person they're interacting the most with is teachers. And that student to teacher relationship is really important. It's really important that, students are being welcomed by their teachers, are being educated, are able to ask them for help. And, like, again, like those people really want like evaluation processes for teachers. They want their teachers to know that, they want their to know that their good teachers are being like uplifted and being used as examples. So I always say this to the board, like if the teachers are unhappy, the students are unhappy, and if the teachers don't know what's going on, the students don't know what's going on. And so that's definitely a thing that stood out to me the most. I also wanted to really quickly uplift someone who asked about student safety, which is definitely another hot topic. I think that there's a lot of nuance in that, students feel unsafe, but they also feel unsafe when there are like metal detectors and these really heavy security measures. So, I think we are in times where we really need safety measures, and a lot of districts are pushing these things really hard. But we also have to think about the emotional impact on kids and how we're providing like wraparound services with like mental health and everything.
Nia, I would love to double tap on
Please.
what you said about what exactly student board members care about and should care about. We often have this tendency to try to tunnel student board members into student issues when in fact we are board members. And although it may be a very generic response, I care about everything that comes before the state school board because everything that comes before the state school board impacts students in some way. But I can tell you what my philosophy is on the student experience and what it should be. I'm a student voice absolutist. I believe in student autonomy over their education, whether that's choosing their general courses, their advanced courses, dual enrollment courses, or choices about apprenticeships and career technical opportunities. I do not believe that an educator or a school member, a member of the school personnel should be able to stop a student who wants to explore and to take a course from being able to take that course and to use that time in high school for experimentation and to really learn what they are passionate about. And that's what high school is all about. So that is my philosophy on what the student experience should be. And when we're considering what the future of our career connected learning system is going to look like, that has been something that I've continuously returned to as my North Star.
All right. Moving on to our next question. How can boards be more intentional about uplifting student voice? I can start off for this one. And one thing that I've advocated for many times, and I will keep advocating for, is establishing honorary voting rights or preferential voting rights if your district doesn't already have them. I mentioned that I'm currently working with my board chair and superintendent to establish this for my role and the junior role in this position because at a lot of times students can feel very intimidated going into meetings. They may, at the start, experience a learning curve where they're afraid to speak up about issues. And having any form of voting rights is really just a very established, formalized way for the students to display their voice. Frequently, districts specifically have the students vote before the adult board. That way, even if students are uncomfortable or unable or unwilling to talk about their opinion on a certain topic before the board is able to vote, the students at the end of the day will either vote for or against it, informing the adult board members. Um, so I really cannot speak more highly about establishing honorary voting rights, and it's also very possible for those to eventually evolve into full voting rights, which are a lot less common and more controversial, but equally as important. And one thing I will add is that I don't think I've ever met a school board member who has been on a board with students with full voting rights and said that they don't think students deserve full voting rights.
I agree with what Connor's saying. I've heard there's staff members who served in like Baltimore, and they were telling me how it was when there was a student board member there, and how sometimes the board member would be very like the student board member would be very attacked for that. I think that's the image a lot of adults and board members have of the student board member, when in reality a lot of the people stepping into this role are juniors and seniors who can understand that this is going to be a political, like sort of a political role. I would like to echo the voting rights again, because I feel like it's very consultative in nature when you can only speak and you can't do anything about it. One thing that I've gotten into the habit of doing as I've gotten more comfortable in the role, I have a 1 year term and I'm sad that I got more comfortable with it towards the end, but nevertheless, I always participate in the discussions and I say, I would vote this way if I had a vote. And I make sure to say, if I have a vote, kind of guilt them. I don't have a vote, but it is Virginia law. So it is established non-voting right and not a right to non-vote. In the bill, it's a non-voting advisory representative, and we are trying to change that in the next few years. I've talked with other former board members or people from Prince William County, other counties. We're working to fix that, but voting rights is the main priority.
Yeah, I know I'm sort of just singing the same tune, but just as every major civil social movement has said, give us the vote. Just give us the vote. Put your money where your mouth is, and give students the right to vote on school boards. That's the best way to be intentional about it. And as a voting member of a school board, again, I cannot emphasize enough how empowering it is to know that not only is it an option for them to consult you because it's just smart to do in terms of forming and cultivating those interpersonal relationships, but you also count toward the quorum and the passage of agenda items as well. So it's sort of not a choice for them to ignore you. And so give us the vote. That would be that's my takeaway.
Yeah, I will sing a different tune and I will say training. So I think, board members are not thrown into their roles in the same way students so often are. Some boards even do like rotating members where the student is only there for one meeting. Sometimes they just throw students in for 1 year. But board members serve multiple terms. They have statewide training, they have required hours. So, include your member in those trainings. I had an incident in my like as an apprentice because I was only so last year I was the first junior doing it and my friend Sophia was the first senior. And so neither of us really got to be in like a very polished role. And I was consistently like I would have like reporters who thought that since I was like a child, they could like prey on me and ask me questions and things like that. And so I got a couple of those emails in my inbox. And so, that can be like really dangerous for a student if they're not given appropriate training to know, like, pass this on to your media person, don't speak for the board. Um, and, that's if you give students the tools to succeed, they won't embarrass themselves and they will do good work. Like even my city has like a youth council where the commissioners work directly with the students and then they lead their own initiatives. Like I really can see the pivotal change between like, if you ask a student before they know about government governance, they might say that what they want to change is like vending machines or lunch boxes. But as soon as you like put them in, let them do their research, let them lead their own initiatives, let them like visit schools, then they start saying things like, Narcan and ice and those kinds of things. Sorry, those are the only examples I can think of right now. I also think another thing that's been really pivotal for me is having an internship block that kind of aligns typically with the time of my board meetings, which allows me to not only miss less school because I just have an internship period during a lot of the board meeting times, but also, part of my homework is to like meet with an underprivileged focus group or something like that, where I'm leading my own initiatives and therefore I don't have to do everything outside of like my school when I already have a lot of things to do. Um, I also, there have been a couple questions in chat about, there's one, so if for the unacquainted, there was an incident where a student in Tennessee, this, I don't know if anyone's familiar, but a board member like called a student hot and like pulled her towards him during a meeting, which was just very gross misconduct. And, while that was an obvious case of like, harassment, like I also think it attests to something that is kind of understudied with student board members, which is like how can you be like condescending and predatory in your language towards student board members? So like one comment that a lot of adults might not think is condescending, but that a lot of people will often say is like, "Oh, that was really mature of you to say," or "Wow, you're way more mature than like I thought you would be," or like something like that. And it's like this is a peer. Like you should be treating your student board member as a peer, and it can be really like condescending to say what they're saying is mature despite their age because again, young adults, like we know what's going on and we're trying to do our job for students in the same way that any other board member is doing. So also I know there's a question about what we wished researchers would research more, and I really think that like student to adult relationship, what comments are made, what languages used, and how that can increase cooperation or when there is condescension. I think that's like that would be a really interesting study. I know a study that did happen was they found that having a student actually increased cooperation from board member to board member, which I've personally seen in my own district. So, opening the floor on anyone that wants to respond to any of that, you can either talk about like the incident that happened if you feel the need to, or like what's a topic of interest to you that you wish researchers would research more about the role.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly circle back to a few things. One thing Faith was mentioning with how being on a school board is inherently political and can cause some discomfort from all parties at times. Uh, and sometimes adults are worried that giving a student voting rights is going to make them potentially exposed to the public in a way that could be negative. One uh, aspect that's frequently built into the honorary voting role is the ability to abstain from voting, just as adult board members do. And I've personally heard of and seen student board members abstain from voting if it's a topic that's too controversial for them to put their opinion out about.
I would add that there is no way to be, because of the inherent politicization of education, um, you know, you're never going to be more vulnerable than as a student in the public education system right now, because of the way things are moving, politically, societally, and now even technologically. And so I would consider that. I also say I would love to see a study on how student board representation impacts specifically in low income and districts and states of color, seeing civic engagement for students in those districts who have experience with student board members on a state or a local level. I know for my county, I was the first from this state student board member hailing from this county in about a decade. And I know so many students who are now inspired to do similar work because of that. So it just reminds us of the role that we play and contributing, yes, contributing to education policy, but also and helping support that next person who's going going to be contributing to education policy as well.
One thing that I would add for a research question is how I was talking about this the other day with somebody who was also trying to get vote a student voting member on the board of supervisors for Virginia, and we were talking about how there should be data about how civic participation among students is affected by having a student board member versus not having one, and then based on this conversation, I kind of thought of going deeper, having a voting member versus a non-voting one, and I think we can guess how that data would go, but I'd also like really love to see it.
Yeah, and this is just like a personal question, and I also want to say we do have to move on very soon, so this is the final call for any audience questions. But Connor mentioned this earlier, and I know it's brought up often. Do you feel like elections turn into popularity contests, or do you feel like students are able to make educated decisions about, um, about their peers?
I think depending on how the election process is, it can turn into a popularity contest. If it's something where it's like whoever has the biggest and baddest recruitment wins, whoever can reach the most students, sell the most cookies wins, I think that can turn into a popularity contest. But I think if it's coupled with something where it's like you aren't really face to face with the student, like for example, reading applications, then an in-person component, then other things, and like where you're questioning and doing stuff like that, I'm not gonna sort of glaze my district for that, but I think we do that process really well. And I like the kind of invasive questions that are asked by students and adults alike. I think if you kind of, I think it can turn into a popularity contest if the right steps aren't taken.
I believe it can turn into a popularity contest. I believe any election can turn into a popularity contest. You know, do we ask adults, for example, whether or not the persons that they elect for public office are elected by popularity contests? We don't. And ultimately, we live in a society where one of the fundamental principles is popular sovereignty, and the ability to elect your representatives and the trust that we place in adults. We must have the courage to place that same trust in the hands of our students, who will then go on to elect the public officials of the future. So there cannot be a double standard here. And we have to apply this concept of popular sovereignty equally. And so, yes, the answer to the question is yes, but also the answer to if you would ask an adult would be yes as well. Anyone over 18. So I don't see why there should be a differentiation.
One other thing I just wanted to add as well is that um, a lot of times students will be in more urban districts where they'll be representing multiple high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, all of that. And so it's really difficult for it to be just a popularity contest because it's not just, oh, everyone in their friend group voted for them and they had the biggest friend group. For example, some students are voted in to their position by over nearly 100,000 students. And at that point, it's not just having the biggest friend group. You truly need to be viewed by the students as someone who they think can advocate for them because the majority statistically have never even met the person. And then with that, we can move into our final question for the panel, which is just a little fun question of what are your future plans after graduation as we are all seniors?
I'll be brave enough to go first. So May 1st hasn't hit yet, and I will wait until the last day to decide. But as an Atlanta native, I'm really heavily considering Georgia Institute of Technology. But then I also was lucky to receive the Chancellor Scholarship at Vanderbilt, so which is full tuition, and that is super exciting. So ultimately, I really want to study a mixture of like design and technology and how we can like build effective tools and systems using those things, but I'm also because of this role, very interested in policy and education policy specifically, and would love to have a future career that is like directly concerning school districts and education. And so I'd love to do like a master's in education policy.
I guess I'll go ahead and bite the bullet. Um, I will be in the fall. I have committed to my school. I am very happy to announce that I will have committed to Harvard College for this fall, and I will be studying government there. And the blessing is that I will be going for free for all 4 years, full ride. And so it's really, really exciting to continue in my pursuit of making a better world through public service.
I'm attending James Madison University. I was saying before, I just got the package, so that was very funny to me as we have this discussion. And I'm very glad that I'll still be in Virginia because I do get to continue working with some of the state policies that I've been interested in. And I'm surprise, surprise, planning to major in political science. Whether I add another major or minor is to see. Whether I even change my major is to see. But I'm very excited.
Um, I next year will be attending Columbia University studying philosophy and economics, and very excited to be in Manhattan. Big change up from rural, small town Maine.
All right, thank you so much, panel, for sharing your insights today. Before I turn it over to George, I just want to say if you have remaining questions for our panelists, we'd love to reach out and I think we can drop our contact information. I'm pretty sure you can find us all on LinkedIn as well, and I think we'd love the connections. So just first name, last name. And George, take it away.
Yes, thank you so much to our incredible panel. Just wanted to share a few final pieces from my end. So we do have resources for student board members in school districts. I mentioned one of these in response to one of the questions that came in during the panel. We provide support on establishing the student board member position and also offer model bylaws which districts can adapt to their own context. But then we also have a growing series of resources for student board members getting started in the position, thinking about how to effectively represent their peers in governance, and how to navigate policy and develop policy proposals to bring forward to their board. Additionally, I also mentioned this piece in the answer to one of the questions, but we have an annual student trustee action readiness training, which is one of the big events where throughout the year, close to the start of the school year, taking place September 18th to 20th, there is supposed to be a picture on this slide. I'm not quite sure why it's not coming up. But we really do everything from board governance to budgeting to effective student representation, and participants go away having worked intensively on policy that they can then take to their school boards. They participate in a mock board meeting, and the whole program is peer-to-peer and near-peer led. So if you know anyone who might be interested or have student board members that would benefit, please definitely share this opportunity with them. They can find out more and register at nsbma.net/start 2026. Before we close it out today, we do have a poll this is our first session, which is kind of open to a wider public and kind of geared towards an adult audience and not so much not specifically student board members. Obviously, this was a panel led by students and we welcome student participation. But we wanted to get your feedback on what would be interesting to see in a subsequent session for a subsequent webinar for a similar audience. So, what would you like to learn more about in a subsequent session? Student board member perspectives and experiences, like you heard today, best practices in implementing the position, more or additional research on student board members, perhaps something else. Drop your preferences. You can vote for more than one in the poll, as that will help us as we think about subsequent sessions and webinars. With that, I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. A big thank you also once again to our panelists. And we will be uploading the recording and the slides to our website, so we'll be sending that around. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great rest of your afternoon or evening wherever you are.